Right, so not entirely sure how this is going to work, but let's give this a go. So this is supposed to be a tutorial on machine learning. So let me first share, I'm going to share the whole screen for this one. Entire screen. No, this is fine, right? I'm going to share the entire screen. So the first thing to get is just to let you know where the resources are. So if you do, let's give this a try. So if you do GitHub, I think it's TAPGFD-ML tutorial. Han, did you hear that? So I think if
I see that you have received a link to the tutorial, right? Everybody who signed up has received a link.
I think Manita is asking if you would like to introduce.
Oh, yeah. So yeah. Originally, it was me who is supposed to lead you through the tutorial and present everything, but I cannot make it here in person. But Julian kindly agreed to help, and so basically, I'm here today just to answer questions online, if I can, and help out some logistics. So just a brief introduction of myself. I'm currently a postdoc working in the University of Edinburgh with Jack Van Ness. Currently, I work on some series of interactions between surface waves and currents. Prior to this job, I had a short postdoc in University of Toronto where I work on some machine learning approaches to infer the internal tidal signals from sea surface height signals. So that's how I got exposed to machine learning. But yeah, today the main stage is for Julian.
Okay, so the preparation, so we prepared something for you online. So the preparation is joined, but the propaganda you're going to hear is from me. I'll get to the propaganda in a little bit. So just let me show you where you would get the material. So one thing you can do is you can, let's see if this will work. No, it doesn't work. So what you might have to do, you have to go to my GitHub. You have to go to my GitHub itself, probably. So there's a link which is given, but you can search for it online as well, probably. So if you go to my GitHub page, that's my face, obviously. You go to repository. There's a TAPGFD-ML tutorial. So this is a public repository where you can access the material I'm going to be using. Well, most of the material I'll be using will be here. If you click on this, then there is the, wait a second. So the two files that you will need, so these are the slides which I'll be using in a little bit. This is the notebook, okay? So there are two ways to get this thing for the hands-on session. So I'll do essentially the hands-on session will be, so the first part, what I will probably do is just give you an overview on what the machine learning is and what data you will be using. The second part is kind of a self-study thing. You can just try it yourself. But there's a tricky bit in that you need to either set up your own Python environment on your own computer, or you would do this online using a cloud instance, but you need to download and upload the data. So I've not managed to make the data stream. So that's my bad. I'm sorry about it. So if you have GitHub already, you can go on this and just clone the thing. So that would probably be the easiest. Failing that, you can download a zip file. All right. So in the README file itself, there's kind of some explanation on what's going on. So a lot of the material is actually already initially written by my student, Theo. So the data I have not managed to upload. So GitHub has a limit on, I think, 100 megabytes per file. So I've not uploaded that. You will need to click this link and download it. So I made it publicly available on Google Drive. So while I'm talking for the next 45 minutes, you might want to think about downloading this if you're going to try and use it on your laptop or on the cloud instance. So when you click here, there's an image. So it's not obvious, it's not entirely clear where the download button is in Google Drive, but I've made an image to show you where it would be. All right. So there are two ways to do this. So the first one is if you have your own laptop, I would recommend if you have Python already, then you probably know what to do. If you've not had Python before, the first thing I would recommend you getting is Anaconda or something similar. So either Anaconda or Miniconda. or there's one called Mamba as well, Mamba download. So most things I'll be talking about, I'll be using Anaconda, but in the everything works basically the same way. So Anaconda is a Python package, so it is a package manager. So the first thing you do not want to do when you do these kind of things is you do not want to download every single dependency, because that's a pain in the ass. You don't want to do that. So Anaconda is one way to work. It has built-in trees to tell you, suppose you want a certain package, it will find all the dependencies, and it will find the right versions of the dependencies. Then what happens is if you want something else and that overwrites it, then that overwrites the whole dependency tree. So you get a consistency, all right? The second thing that is that if you're new to Python, the second thing I highly recommend you do, or rather the thing you do not want to do, when you get Anaconda, the first thing you need to do is create an environment. So the reason is that if you install things to base, if you, for whatever reason, at some point you have a clash, then you're screwed. You will probably need to ditch, you have to nuke everything and start again. If you do it within a container or an environment, then what you do is you download all your packages. So there's the libraries here, your environment link to the libraries. So what you do is if this thing clashes, you just kill your environment and start again. But your packages are not touched. So what that means is you don't have to reinstall everything. So there are some commands in Anaconda on what you would need to do. So this is not quite the one. Anaconda download would be here. I have not used Anaconda for a while. Python. Right. So there would be something like installing one. Let's take Windows. So I don't use Windows. So, let's see. So you would download a package, you click the install button, and then, so in Windows and in the Mac ones, there's a GUI, so there's graphical user interface, so you can do it through that. Normally I do it through the terminal. So within this, and then you can have a look at the manual itself to tell you how you create your own virtual environment. For the current tutorial, I think as long as you do anything which is beyond Python 3.7, it will work. So the current version, which is normally uses Python 3.9. Okay, but anything after 3.7 should be fine. 3.7, because 3.7 is the recent stable one, if I remember correctly. If you do this in Linux, it's slightly different. In a Mac, it's basically like Windows. But I highly recommend you do use it through some sort of package manager for this. Okay, so we're here, I guess some of us will be here for the second half if you are struggling with that. And for that, what you would need to do is, once you download that, you download the package, and then you make sure when you open the notebook, you point to the data, and then you're done. There's some packages that you will need to install, but I'll write the list down in a little bit. I should have written a YAML file. If you don't want to do that, then another way to do this is using a cloud instance, using Google Colab. So there's a button here which you can click, and that will open a Google Colab instance. So this is now on the cloud. You've done absolute. When you run the things, it's done on the Google Cloud server somewhere. It's not on your laptop as such. So what happens is you click a command, it sends a command out there, does something, and it sends it back. All right. So this ends up opening the notebook. The subtlety here is making the notebook read the data. So there's a set of instructions on how I recommend you do this. The first thing I recommend you do is you actually save it to your own Google Drive. So what happens is if you close this, then nothing is saved. It's just a temporary instance. It doesn't. Once you save it, the whole cache ends up clearing. If you don't have Google Drive, then you need an account. So you need a Google account to get a Google Drive. So let's suppose you have so you save a copy in your Google Drive, and then you open it in your own cloud instance. The next thing you would need to do is, I'm going to kill this one. I don't need this one. The next thing you would need to do is you need to download the data from the Google Drive, which I provided, and then upload it to your own Google Drive, because otherwise it would not be able to see the data. So that one gets a little bit tricky, so I can help with that. Then there's extra code you need to do. You need to mount the Google Drive, and then you need to mount the drive and then load the data. Oh, yeah.
I think it's Han trying to talk to you.
Where's my mouse? Yeah, so Han gave out a set of packages that you would need. So you can have a look on the Zoom for this. I'll write it out here in a little bit. Google Colab already has some packages installed, so you don't need to install your own Python for this. There are certain things that can go wrong, so I think I've squashed most of the most common ones. So have a look at the README if it comes out. One of the things you could be doing whilst I'm talking is trying it yourself, because I think most of the things I'm talking is just an overview. You don't need too much detail from it. Okay. So the second part, I think, if you have some questions trying to set up your the Google Cloud, or you're trying to set up on your own laptop, there is me and 2 other helpers going around to help within the room itself. If you're online, then please talk to Han. So I think Han's got the short end of the stick, because helping people code online is the worst thing for me personally. So the slides are here, so I suppose I should download the slides. So for the next maybe 30 minutes or so, I'll just give you an overview on my view of how I think machine learning works. So I'm going to stop sharing and share again. So what I need to do is to do this one, open Acrobat, Control L, and then Zoom, share. Okay, so here we go. Let's see how this works. Can I get rid of this? Okay, can people online see my slides? See a somewhat slightly disturbing image of a polar penguin bear. All right. Okay, so for the next half an hour, I'm going to give you my overview on what I feel, or at least how I see machine learning. So for some of you who've already talked, so this is full disclosure. So for those of you who've talked with me a little bit already, you probably already know my feelings about machine learning. For those of you who don't know, so this might summarize it. So this is a generated machine learning artificial. It's like an image generator which I found online. It's one of the only free ones I found online. I think I put something like penguins in the North Pole or something similar. So of course there's no penguins in the North Pole. I'm trying to make a point here. But the images it end up giving out is something like, so here you got a polar, well, you know, so there's no penguins in the North Pole. The polar bear itself has a bit of a flipper, and this is some weird hybrid, some weird hybrid polar penguin bear. So my point here somewhat is that so machine learning is a very powerful tool. It's a very useful tool. It's very accessible in some ways. But the propaganda, at least my view is for you, is that I would like you to just to remind you, it's just a tool. Right? You're the person using the tool. It's a very powerful. It's like statistics in a way. It's just a tool. Don't make too much out of it. And ultimately, it has to be application driven. You have to think of the application in advance to see whether the tools itself is applicable. My personal, I'm very conservative in this sense. So my personal feeling is that if you end up using a hammer too much, then everything looks like a nail. You don't really want to do that. So that's my piece of propaganda. All right, so this doesn't work, right? Does this work? No, I'll just use this one. Yep, so I've got more cursed images coming up. Okay, so the overview is I'm going to give you a loose introduction of machine learning. It's very brief. So I come from an applied mathematics background. So one of the things I do quite a lot is optimization problems. So the way I'm going to phrase machine learning really is as an optimization problem. So you have some sort of mismatch. You want to tune something to minimize that mismatch. So that's how I normally think about it. Usually machine learning problems are classified under 2 classes. It's either supervised or unsupervised. Most of it, I would argue, is actually supervised. So I'll kind of tell you what the differences are. I'll give you a sample usage, how it's been used in oceanography, including some kind of publications based on that. And I'll describe the data that we will be using. The data I've provided is Argo data. So I describe a little bit what Argo is. I think Alexa already described a little bit of that. I'll give you just 2 examples on that. All So, I mean, okay, I mentioned the propaganda already. So as one of the talks I've already mentioned, so usually is read machine learning, one of the things is machine learning is a black box. So it can work wonderfully and it can fail spectacularly. And most of the time my issue is I don't know why either way. So I'm okay with tools that work for the right reasons, and I'm okay for things that does not work for reasons I understand. For me, machine learning fails at the second one. I don't understand why it doesn't work. Sometimes when it works, I still don't understand why. So to me, sometimes that feels like you're essentially making some sort of sacrifice with some dark god. So if you feel you're some sort of primal god and you feel like you want to worship some Daedric prince, you make a sacrifice to it, you get answer, but then you don't necessarily understand why you got that answer. So sometimes knowing the right question to ask is very important. So my point here, at least, but I hope you remember, it's like what you would do in statistics. You should do sanity checks. You need to check whether your things are giving you sensible things. And you should kind of find trivial examples to check your machine learning things if you're doing kind of applications. Okay, so the way I feel machine learning is really from a point of view of regression. So defining some terminology. If we have the input, output, and the model, so X is the input, Y is the output, and F is the model. So normally, if you know the model and if you have a model and you have the input, this would be your goal would be to get the output. So this would be what's known as a prediction or a forward problem. The thing I work on a little bit recently, quite a bit recently actually, is if you have the output and you have the model and you want to get the input, so this would be inference or what's known as an inverse problem. In the regression point of view or from a machine, to me, that's really what machine learning is if you have the input and output, but you don't know the model. So you do some kind of statistics or deterministic approach to get your model. So that to me is, so that's the end product you would get usually from a machine learning model. Is you get a mapping between the input and the output. And the goal is you try and do it such that you minimize some sort of mismatch, right? So here, this is your prediction. This is your actual data. So what you want to do is you want to measure a skill. So in this case, I happen to measure a skill by the square or the root mean square. And the name of the game is you have some free parameters within your F, and you want to choose an F that minimizes this kind of mismatch. So J is usually, in the optimization literature, J would be known as the objective function or the mismatch function. In the machine learning literature, this is called a loss function. This particular one is usually known as the root mean square error. I normally just call it the L2 error because there's more general cases. And then the thing I should just I should maybe just highlight is that these kind of optimization and regression problems ultimately depend on your choice of J, and you have some freedom in J, right? So just because everybody uses root mean squared does not mean you have to use root mean squared. So I would say most of the material online uses root mean squared. There's a reason why the L2 mismatch is actually a good thing. So one example you might have encountered already is linear regression. So linear regression, what you have is you got y equals ax plus b. So the name of the game is you choose an a and y such that your prediction and your output is as small as possible. So you might have seen this as the line of best fit. So if you have an XO, you got some scatter plot, you want the line that is as close to all the points as possible in some measure or another. The reason you do L2, in this case, the L2 error gives you a unique solution. That's why in some ways the L2 measure is a good one. Another one would be polynomial fitting. That's another one. ML, so machine learning gives, in a nutshell, follows the same principles. The algorithms are different, and the models you end up with could be different. So they could be non-linear, they could be network-based, it could be using different optimizers, they could be stochastic, probabilistic, whatever. Ultimately, the way you should think about it is that it provides you a mapping from the input to the output. It's just getting a mapping. So this was somewhat mentioned already. So normally what you do is you split up into 3 bits of, you have a data set, you split up into 3 bits. There's the training, there's the validation, and there's the testing. So my naming is consistent with the two talks before. So the training data is the one so the training and the validation you expose to the machine learning algorithm. So this one is for computing the loss function. The validation is for tuning the hyperparameters within the model itself. then it's always prudent to test, to have some sort of test data which the machine learning algorithm has not seen. So you measure the skill by the test data. Sometimes you might see online the validation and tests are swapped around. But the main thing is you want to hold some data that the machine learning model has not seen before, and you want to test the skill using that. Okay, so to talk about, so most of it, most of machine learning is supervised. So so it's easy to talk about what is unsupervised. So unsupervised means that my data is unlabeled. So here, so essentially, I just give you some numbers. That's basically some numbers or some text. That's it. I don't tell you what it is. And I say, give me some features from this data which I haven't told you anything about. Just give me some features. Or find me clusters. So one example you have actually seen already. So in some sense, Zoe was doing machine learning, right? So EOFs is one example of this. So the EOF or the PCA or the SVD or the proper orthogonal decomposition, dynamical mode decomposition, whatever, they're really the same things. I'll give you an example of how EOFs actually work, but someone asked about it yesterday. So here what I have is I've got some images of cats and dogs. But the machine does not know that. I just give them some images. So from the machine point of view, I basically have a square array of numbers. So it could be from 0 to 1. So 0 could be white and 1 is black. So it's a black and white image here, right? And I have a whole load of these. So what I would do, so the way you do, in this case, you do the EOF or the PCA, is you take this array, you take it square, it doesn't have to be square, but you take this array, you stretch it out into a one array, you stack all of them up with the different images. So now you have a big matrix. And essentially what you want to do is you want to do something like an eigenvalue or eigenvector decomposition. So you want to find the eigenvectors of this big matrix. If your matrix is not square, you can't do the eigenvector, but you can do the singular vector. So then what you do is you have you decompose it into your singular vector basis. So it essentially is finding a basis mathematically. These are then ranked by the singular values, which is related to the variance explained. And then the idea is you have a big matrix, you have a basis for it, but you say that maybe I only want a few of these. So instead of having, I don't know, like a million by million matrix, I just take 3 modes or 3 or 4 modes. So suppose I take 4 modes, then I would take the first 4 eigenvectors, the singular vectors is a one big array. I switch it back into, I map it back into an array, and that would be a mode of variability, or your first mode, or your first EOF, or something along those lines, or first principal component. So that's what this one does. So this is a paper by Brunson, Proctor, and Kutz. So you take a whole load of images, you do a PCA analysis of it, and then you plot out the first 4 EOFs. And they look like this. So the idea would be that you can do linear combinations of 1, 2, 3, and 4 with some linear combination, and you're able to recover some aspects of these images. Okay. So it's really, you can think it's really a basis. You're trying to find an empirical basis for it. So then you can use this for doing further things, right? So you can say, well, suppose I now tell you it's cats and dogs, then maybe I can train up some sort of model to say that if I have most power in this guy and this guy, then it's more likely. I take your image. So say, from the cat's pool, I say that the decomposition seems to have more power in this first, second, and third mode. Then I would say that, if from a training or machine learning model, I'll give it a criteria to say that if you give me an image, I project it onto these modes, and it's got most power in 2 and 3, then I call this a cat. Otherwise, I call it a dog, or I don't know. Something like that. And then it becomes supervised learning. All right, so clustering does something similar, so I'll talk about clustering in a little bit later. Neural networks can do the same thing. So supervised learning is the other one. So when you have an input and output, in some ways, by definition, that is already supervised. So you're saying that this is an input and this is an output. So often you want this for prediction purposes. So things like regression, neural networks, a whole load of these are really supervised learning. You have to tell the thing what data am I giving you, and you'll find a map between the two. There are other characterizations like semi-supervised reinforcement. If you want to know more about it, Wikipedia is a great place to start. So one example of supervised learning here would be, suppose you were interested in identifying images of animals from food. Suppose you want to write a very big grant to say it's extremely important, world-changing in that if you cannot identify animals and food, then somehow your world is going to blow up, whatever. Then you want to train up a machine learning model based on some images. So here what I have to do is I give it these images, but I have to label these, right? So I have to say I want the mapping to distinguish whether this is in fact a dog, a chihuahua, or this is a muffin. So I have to label the data. So this one is an array of some description, but I have to also, in addition, tell it that this is in fact a chihuahua. Or for this one, this would be, this one's a loaf, and this one's a corgi butt. You have to make sure, so for this one, it has extra information which is provided by the, tagged onto the data. So you think that is it, there's more of these. So my favorite one is this one. This is Labradoodle fried chicken. This is, for a long time, this was my profile picture. There are many others. If you're interested, go on the internet. All right. A slightly less, I guess a more scientific example would be, I'll give you some more scientific examples, which is oceanography based. So this one is by Guillaume Mays. So the data I'm going to give you today is actually taken somewhat from this. So I got it third hand, actually, from Guillaume. So here what they do is you have Argo float data, and what you want to do is you want to do clustering based on water mass. So you want to say within this cluster, so you want to find clusters of where the water, where the regions where the water is most related like the other one. So what this one is finding, for example, is that it's finding there is some big purple bit, but the red bit on the flanks of it is actually quite close to each other in that sense. And then it identifies kind of different water mass types, say. So this is one possible example. The exact details I don't want to talk too much about. Oh, I guess this must be the old slide, so I'm going to go to this one first. So related to this would be the another paper by Jones et al. So this is using the same similar methodology and the same model, but using it for Southern Ocean data. So here what they do is they do the clustering, and you find that there are different water masses. And the idea here is that by identifying the different water mass clusters, the boundary becomes your fronts. So this is a way to identify your subantarctic fronts, for example. Rather than by criteria based, this is untrained. So this is purely from data, essentially by similarity. You can use things for prediction. So this is a sea ice model. So it's trained on, I guess, images of sea ice cover from satellite. So it's an image analysis point of view. So you have some data, and so give me some observables, throw it into the model, and that gives you a prediction of what the sea ice should be. And they cross-validate it against observations, and it seems fairly reasonable. So this one is able to give you some sort of confidence interval to say you're definitely sure that there is water here, and you're probably sure that the ice edge is somewhere here, and this bit is definitely open water. So some of these machine learning models are able to give you probabilities as well, or confidence intervals as well. Next one. So this is a slightly different example by Micah Sonnenwald. So this is the, if I remember right, this is the Southern Ocean Supergiant paper. So what they do here is they take the data, they analyze it from a barotropic vorticity point of view. So you decompose all your data into the components which is contributing to the barotropic vorticity balance. So there's the Serdrup component, there is the bottom pressure torque component, there are nonlinear components, et cetera, and then you do clustering based on that, is my understanding of what's actually going on. So from that, they identified different regions which have a similar dynamical regime. So here, for example, they identify that there is one big supergiant which that goes almost all the way around Antarctica, which is nonlinear, which essentially is the non-linearity is important. So Manita, do you want to?
No, I just wanted to say maybe we can break in a few minutes for coffee and then we'll continue.
Yes, so how about if I finish all the oceanographic examples and then we can take a break?
Right.
Yeah, I only have 3 more slides for So one other possibility here would be, it's like I guess I would call it temporal downscaling of SSH. So what you have is you have your, when you take a SSH from satellite, you're really having tracks. So until, so it takes a while for the whole track to cover a certain region. So what that means is that the SSH images are temporally sparse. So one way you can do this, so you have two images and you know they have to, one image has to deform into another in some way, but I suppose you want it dynamic, some way dynamically consistent, possibly. So one thing you can do, so this is work from Georgi Mancharian. So you do some sort of network to do temporal downscaling. So you say that I have so I know one has to go into the other, but I train up on some model where I have higher resolution data, and then I just throw the day 0 and day 20, and then I can predict what's actually happening in between, something like that. So that's a way to kind of give you extra data, kind of do a temporal interpolation, which is not necessarily linear interpolation, which might have some semblance of dynamics in it. This is one of Han's examples. So you take an observation of SSH, and you use that to predict what's the interior signal. So this would be the internal tide signal. So they use what's known as a generative adversarial network, or sometimes known as GAN. So trained on appropriate data. So if you're interested, you can have a look at these data. CSF as height, not height. Two more examples. So this one is from Aviv Solodok, and I think Andrew Stewart's involved in this one as well. So this one is using echo data. So this is the global state estimate. So what they want to do ultimately is to predict the AMOC strength at least. So how they do this is they have certain observables like SST from the global state estimate itself. But you also know in the model what is the diagnosis, or what's the associated AMOC. They train a model based on that, and the idea is that if you have the observations of if you have the other observables from your actual observations, then you can use that as a way to infer for what the AMOC is. You can use the observational data to infer for what the AMOC is. So this should be calibrated against observational things like the Rapid 26 North measurements, etc. So this is I think that is the idea. So the reason they use echo is because it's supposed to be dynamically consistent. Okay, last example is something that I've worked on a little bit. So this is actually, the original idea is due to Tom Bolton, Bolton and Zanner. This is from Tom Bolton's PhD thesis. It's for parametrization. So in parametrization, what you have is you've got your eddy flux and you've got your mean. So, normally what we do is we postulate some sort of relation between the eddy flux and the mean. So in the Fickian diffusion approach, you take it to be a diffusivity multiplied by the gradient of the mean. But you could do machine learning on this, right? So you have your eddy flux and you have your mean. So just use data-driven to find a map between the mean and the eddy part. So that's more or less what they do. So within a small box, you can diagnose the running mean of the eddy fluxes. You correlate that with the time mean stream function, say. So you train up a neural network based on that. So that gives you an image. So this is essentially an image problem. So you put in one image, it gives you another image. This would be your subgrid forcing, and then you throw the subgrid forcing. You can, in principle, throw the subgrid forcing back into your prognostic model. So this would be a way to do parameterization. The thing I worked on is based on this kind of experimental framework, but it's slightly different. So I was more interested in things like information extraction. All right, so that is the overview for now. So maybe, as Manita suggested, we can take a break, and then after this, I have just a bit more description of what the code and the data provided is. Okay. Any quick questions so far?